I'll call the meeting to order. We are here in public, televised, meeting number 46. We have with us tonight some guests from House Administration, and Mr. Boss, great to have you here with us, and I understand you're going to have a short opening statement and introduce who's with you today. So let's go ahead and get that started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm here today with Richard Denis, Deputy Law Clerk, and Mark Waters, Chief Financial Officer, in response to the committee's request for a technical briefing with respect to the Board of Internal Economy's recent decision on certain large volume mailings. Avant de céder la parole à Monsieur Denis, je crois qu'il est important.
Before giving the floor to Monsieur Denis, I believe it is important to address you. As part of my function as the interim secretary for the Board of Internal Economy, in order to clarify the parameters according to which we can communicate to the committee information related to the Bureau's decisions.
Are confidential. Just as board members swear an oath of confidentiality in order to carry out their duties, employees of the House Administration who support the board are bound by the conflict of interest policy that precludes us from communicating information obtained as a result of our employment that is not available to the public. Par conséquent, le légiste adjoint pourra commenter les aspects techniques.
Consequently, the Deputy Law Clerk will be able to comment on the technical aspects of the Board's decisions, which were already made public. He will be able to describe for the members of the committee administrative regulations that have been raised in this context, and will be able to explain differences between the responsibilities of the board and those of your committee. He will also be able to describe the board's authority in order to demand reimbursements. If questions asked by members of the committee touch on technical aspects linked to cost recovery, Mr. Waters will be able to answer them.
Merci, Marc. Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président, ainsi que membres du comité.
Thank you, Marc. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and thank you for the invitation. I made myself available at the earliest possibility following yesterday's meeting of your committee.
Confidentiality imposed on House employees and referred to by the Deputy Clerk. I want to remind the committee that there are professional obligations imposed on myself and council working for the House of Commons by the various law societies to which we belong, also requiring us to protect confidentiality. As you know, the trust that members put in the office of the law clerk and the quality of the advice that they receive from us are of the utmost importance. I want to assure members that they can always count on us to provide neutral, nonpartisan, and professional advice. With this in mind, I am sure that members will understand that I will not be able to specifically speak to the internal discussions that occurred at the board, but as mentioned by Mr. Bosk, I will endeavor to explain the rules that apply in the current circumstances. So perhaps I will start by summarizing the board's recent decision on this matter. So referring to the publicly available minutes of the board's meeting of June 2nd, 2014, the board decided, je vais citer en français, que les envois postaux du...
I will quote it in French, that certain New Democratic Party mailings under recent investigation were in contravention of the board's bylaws on the grounds that they were prepared by and for the benefit of a political party, that the House Administration provide advice to the board on appropriate remedies, that the board spokespersons be authorized to report to the public that the mailings have been found in contravention of the bylaws and that the board is seeking advice on appropriate remedies, and that further to a previous request for proofs of all mailings, all proofs of mailings related to this matter be provided to House Administration for analysis by June 13th, 2014.
Public statement to this effect on June 3rd, 2014, and the board met again on June 11th and issued a statement on the 12th, the next day, that described its determination that 23 NDP members contravened subsection 4, 3, and section 6 and 7 of the members' bylaw. As such, these members would be directed to personally reimburse a total of $36,309 to the Receiver General for Canada, which represents the total direct known cost to the House of Commons. The board statement went on to explain that since the costs related to the use of the members' free mailing privilege under the Canada Post Corporation Act are paid by Canada Post by Transport Canada, the board would be informing Transport Canada of its decision regarding the improper use of the postal privilege, and that this correspondence would be shared with the Chief Electoral Officer. Turning to the bylaws that apply in this situation. In considering the matter of these mailings, the board exercised its exclusive authority under Section 52.6 of the Parliament of Canada Act to determine if the use of House resources was proper. And I will state 52.61 because, of course, it's the core provision at play here. Le Bureau a compétence exclusive pour statuer compte tenu de la nature.
The board has the exclusive authority to determine whether any previous, current, or proposed use by a member of the House of Commons of any funds, goods, services, or premises made available to that member for the carrying out of parliamentary functions is or was proper, given the discharge of the parliamentary functions of the members of the House of Commons, including whether any such use is or was proper having regard to the intent and purpose of the bylaws made under subsection 52.5.
Established the value of those resources and considered which action would need to be taken to rectify the situation. So when determining whether or not the use of resources is proper, the test is to establish if such use falls within the parliamentary functions of the member. With specific reference to the bylaws engaged in the board's determination, Section 1 of the member's bylaw established by the board defines what parliamentary functions are. À l'égard d'un député, les responsabilités et les activités qui seraient...
Duties and activities that relate to the position of member were ever performed, and whether or not performed in a partisan manner, namely participation in activities relating to the proceedings and work of the House of Commons, and activities undertaken in representing his or her constituency or constituents.
3 of the members' bylaw provides further clarification on what is not considered parliamentary function as follows. A. Les activités relatives aux intérêts personnels du député.
A. Activities related to the private interests of a member or a member's immediate family.
Communications of a political party, including participation in a party leadership campaign or convention, solicitations of contributions, and solicitations of membership to a political party. D. Les activités visant à appuyer ou à critiquer dans le...
In the context of a federal, provincial, or municipal election, or any other local election to support or oppose a political party or an individual candidate.
Activities that are related to a meeting of an electoral district association as defined in the Canada Elections Act, and that are carried out for nomination, electoral, or sponsorship purposes, or that relate to soliciting contributions or membership. And details of the application of these bylaws are further explained in the policies of the board set out in the members' manual and services for members, which all members are familiar with. So with that, I will now be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Monsieur Denis. Are you asking for time on the spot or?
A point of order.
Point of order, okay.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much, Mr. Denis, for being here. I just wanted to make sure that when the time comes for questions, we're all respectful of the limits that I think exist for the law clerk. At some level, maybe Mr. Denis can help the chair in this point, but the point is that the law clerk has an extraordinarily unique position in terms of being legal counsel at multiple levels. The House as a whole, committees, including this one, the Board of Internal Economy, and individual MPs, including the 23 MPs. And so I would simply ask, as a point of order, if the chair would be willing to convey this and ask maybe Mr. Denis to feel free to indicate if he feels at any point his professional obligations with multiple representation is in any way going to be compromised, or he's going to have a hard time answering for that reason, that he should feel free to say, I can't answer for that reason.
And we've had a bit of a discussion beforehand, and please, what Mr. Scott has just said, I expect to hear from you if you can't answer the question, for you to tell us you can't answer the question. And members may, as they're wont to do from time to time, go a different route to try and get the same answer. I expect that you will guard yourself in that way too. So, sorry, Mr. Denny, did you want to?
Quickly, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite conscious of this multiple role, or many facets of the role that we play at the House, and I can tell you that we take it very seriously. Of course, our primary loyalty, if you wish, or our primary client is the House itself, and it's manifested in many ways. But I will certainly decline to answer a question if I feel that in any situation that would compromise an advice that I would give to any of you or other clients.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll start then. We have Mr. Lukiski on a 7-minute round, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'll get right to it. I think everyone knows the background of why we're here, so I don't have to get into the process that led us here today. So my first question is to Monsieur Denis. Sir, could you lay out for me and the committee exactly what are the rules regarding acceptable mass mailings, and under what conditions are such mailings rejected?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The rules that relate to printing material are found in 2 places. In first, the members' bylaw, one of the four bylaws established by the Board of Internal Economy. So you will find in Section 21 the rules that apply to the mailings. The details, if you wish, are also found in the members' manual, the mass allowances and services, in which the details are found. And
thank you. In essence of time, perhaps then we'll just move on. But thank you for the guide in which we can do our own research. Let me just ask you specifically then, the NDP mailings in question, were the mailings in question vetted by House administration before they were sent out? My understanding is that the NDP used a printer outside of the House of Commons to print these mailings. They didn't use print services. So were they vetted at all before the NDP put them in franked envelopes and mailed them out?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will explain the process that the House goes through when mailings are reviewed. I cannot specifically speak to these mailings because that would be an internal process and things that were discussed at the board. But in general terms, I can say that any mailing that is, and that's what you find in Section 21, any mailing that is prepared by the House, for members by the House administration through the printing services is vetted by our printed services, and they apply the test that you find in the mass.
Right, then in that case, since these mailings, it's generally known and widely known that these mailings in question were not printed in-house, they were printed outside the House of Commons, what ability, if any, does the House administration have to ensure compliance with the rules? In other words, if the NDP deliberately went out and printed some mailings that they didn't feel would be approved by the in-house print services, does the House administration have any ability whatsoever to ensure compliance with the rules?
Mr. Chair, everything that is sent through the frank available to members is not seen by the House administration because it doesn't come to us. All that is done is the frank is being applied by the House. So those mailings of that type would not be seen by the House administration in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. Then can you, further my previous question, could you tell us specifically, or explain at least, how the mailings in question from the NDP contravened the rules?
I cannot explain how these specific mailings would break the rules. I could explain, however, that as you would find in the bylaws and in the mass, the rules that apply to the mass mailings.
My understanding is that there are 3 specific reasons, or 3 instances in which mailings would not be approved. One is that you are prohibited, or members are prohibited from soliciting for memberships in a mailing. Secondly, they would be prevented from soliciting funds in a mailing. And thirdly, they would be prohibited from trying to promote an electoral function, such as a general election or a by-election. Am I correct in that assessment?
Well, without dealing specifically with these specific
I'm saying
mailings, in general, if you simply go to subsection 29.1 in E, we say that are available to members printing of or copying of material provided by the member, except solicitation of membership to a political party, solicitations of contribution for a political party, anything of an electoral nature. And
in that case, then I was correct in those three solicitations. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. This will not relate to the discussions, the internal discussions you had at the Board of Internal Economy, so I don't believe this will prejudice you in any way from answering this question. But I have three specific examples of mailings that the NDP sent out, and I just give you the opportunity to say whether or not some of the content of those mailings, if were brought to the board before, would be approved or not. In the first one is a mailing from Mr. Mulcair himself. In the second to last paragraph, he speaks of trying to defeat the Harper government. And specifically, in the quote in question I will give you is, in 2015, we will be ready to replace it, meaning the Harper government, and form a government that will put your interests first. Would that meet the standard of what is acceptable? Because in my view, this is the promotion of an electoral event, the 2015 federal election.
I don't think I'm in a position, Mr. Chair, to answer this question. However, I just want to point out that the decisions regarding any kind of mailings that goes to the board, ultimately it's the board that makes the decision. So the House administration provides the information, but the decisions about these ultimately are made by the board itself, not the House administration.
Okay. The report that you had been engaged to conduct on behalf of the BOIE, you were asked to conduct an investigation. The findings you have provided to us at the outset of this meeting. My question is, then, if in fact your findings were presented to the board and the board then reacted, would we be able to get, and I guess I put my question to Mr. Bosco on this one, if this committee requested a copy of that report that you presented to the Board of Internal Economy, would you be able to provide it to us?
That would be a decision of the board, Mr. Lukiski.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me ask you this. How common is it for members of Parliament who are producing, whether they be 10%ers, householders?
Mr. Lukiski?
Yes.
Sorry about your time.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Christofferson, you have 7 minutes.
Actually, Mr. Scott's going to lead us off.
Okay, Mr. Scott's going to lead off.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think I may take the spot.
Okay.
And then go to Mr. Scott. Sorry about that. I apologize. We're all eager to answer questions. And I'm following up on Mr. Kiski's questions, which are actually extremely helpful. I have in front of me a mailing that was done by the Conservatives. I'm getting a lot of complaints, actually, about very vicious partisan mailings coming out from the Conservative Party. This one talks about Mulcair's NDP proposing billions in reckless additional spending to be paid for, and talks about new taxes, higher debt. We can't afford Mulcair's risky economic theories. Talks about the Conservative government being focused on things, and actually asks the question who's on the right track, including Conservatives, Greens, NDP, and Liberals. So it's a type of vicious partisan mailing that we're getting a lot of complaints about. I know that there was a complaint sent to the board and the House administration about this. I gather from your answer, Mr. Denis, that the Board of Internal Economy is the one that makes the decision. So I guess you may not be able to answer that, but my question would be, has something like this very partisan Conservative mailing been analyzed in any way? And if you can't answer that, I guess my follow-up question would be, is it not the Board of Internal Economy that has a Conservative majority that ultimately makes the decision as to what mailings are evaluated by the House administration or not? Pardon me? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, every mailing that is brought to the attention of the board is looked by it, and the decision is made if it's properly brought to the board, and it's the board ultimately that makes the decision. So I cannot comment specifically on this one, Mr. Julian, but I can assure you that the material that's brought to the board is in front of the whole board for them to make the decision.
Thank you. No, that answers my question. So it's the Board of Internal Economy that is composed of a conservative majority that makes that decision. I'll pass my speaking spot over to Mr. Scott.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dini, I just wanted to ask, the House of Commons is certainly, it's not a rule of law free zone, correct? And so I'm wondering, is there some sort of presumption that you and your staff and your colleagues actually, some sort of presumption that House institutions should respect fundamental legal principles that would otherwise apply in Canada's legal system, unless there are clear reasons related to the nature of Parliament to depart from them, or unless there's sort of clear internal legal authority not to abide by them? And I'm thinking particularly of rules of procedural justice and that kind of stuff. Would, in any kind of a House context, if there were nothing precluding those rules applying, would the House institutions, as a matter of the rule of law, be asked or expected to conform to those kinds of principles?
Mr. Chair, the rules that apply to the board, similarly to the rules that apply to parliamentary committees, are the rules that these two groups give themselves. So there is no set of rules that specifically applies. It's mostly a self-made rule. If you look at the bylaws of the Board of Internal Economy, specifically on the bylaw that deals with the rules of practice and procedure of the board, you will not find anything about how it conducts its own proceedings. It's all internal.
Thank you. So we're dealing with self-made rules that may or may not conform with broader fundamental principles of justice. So could I ask you, how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Under 3 minutes.
Yeah. Mr. Denis, think about maybe the members of Parliament involved here. Assume that someone's accused of not following rules, whether they're contractual or regulatory, whether they're important or less important. And then a House body, the BOIE here, meets to decide whether this is actually so and what the consequences are. Now the person, just assume it's an MP, is never informed of the meetings discussing his case, never asked to answer a case, never shown the evidence or legal arguments against him, never invited to present arguments or be heard. Then assume that a member of that body comes out of a meeting, gives a press conference saying this person has broken the rules and must make amends. There's no written decision of any consequence, just an annotation, so to speak, from almost minutes, let alone one that sets out reasons that can be assessed for validity or coherence. And then the person might receive a letter from an official that may or may not actually use the same language as the applicable rules that the member was seeking to abide by. And to top it all off, within this internal system, there's no avenue for appeal. If that were to take place, quite apart from the fact, if that were the facts, as a lawyer, would you say that accords with principles of fundamental justice, with natural justice? Are MPs actually being treated in accordance with the norms that we would normally expect to apply outside of the context of the BOIE?
Mr. Chair, I don't want to answer this question specifically. However, I just want to remind members that the board is composed of members from all the parties, all the recognized parties. Board members are provided with the same material when material goes to the board. Each member is aware of the agenda, the material that's presented, as an equal opportunity to assess and the evidence and present more evidence if necessary. And arguments can at least be made at the board. So there is a process. However, if a member is not satisfied with the decision or feels that not enough information was provided, I just want to point out to members Section 9 of the Rules of Practice and Procedure of the Board of Internal Economy, which provides that a member or the House Administration may make requests to the board for direction on the interpretation or application of the bylaws. So someone who feels they don't have enough information about the decision, there is an existing process for them to go through. Subsection 2 tells us that the request referred must be made in writing, in the case of a member, through the whip, so the whips are there as well, and an answer must be provided by the board within 20 sitting days. So there is a process further to a decision of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Denny. Thank you, Mr. Scott. We'll go to Mr. Lamoureux for 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Denny, I hope to get 5 questions answered from you, and I'll try to be as short and concise as possible. I would like to ask about the oath of secrecy that members of the Board of Internal Economy must swear, according to Section 50 in bracket 5 of the Parliament of Canada Act, which states the following. Every member of the board shall, as soon as practical after becoming a member of the board, take before the clerk of the House of Commons an oath of affirmation of fidelity and secrecy in the form set out in Form 3 of the schedule. If we go to Section 50, bracket 6, it states, for greater certainty, the oath or affirmation referred to in subsection 5, or in bracket 5, only relates to matters of security, employment, and staff relations, tenders, and investigations in relation to member of the House of Commons. We are, in fact, in favor of open meetings of the Board of Internal Economy, and my leader, in fact, has a bill to do just that. Can you please tell the committee if an oath of fidelity and secrecy currently contained in the Parliament of Canada Act applies to the issue that we are discussing today, as it seems to fall under the rubric of investigation in relation to a member of the House of Commons?
Mr. Chair, I would answer yes, in the sense that in the case at hand, what we have is a decision of the board which was made to refer documents to this committee to help it in the furtherance of its mandate. And if you look at the oath specifically, the oath mentions that members take the oath and they say that I will not communicate or allow to be communicated to any person without due authority on that behalf and information. And the view would be that due authority came from the board, and the fact that we were faced at this committee with an instruction from the House made it that the committee could go ahead and the board could go ahead and transmit the information.
On June the 12th, the Board of Internal Economy made a determination regarding an inappropriate use of House of Commons resources and directed that this money be reimbursed. It was my understanding that this decision was taken based on the recommendations of the non-partisan professional civil servants of the House of Commons. Can you comment on that?
All I can say, Mr. Chair, is that information from the House Administration is provided to the board, and the board itself, looking at what is presented, it makes the decision ultimately on whether or not, in its opinion, the resources were properly used.
Okay. I'm going to refer to something that you made reference to earlier, and that's Section 52.6 of the Parliament of Canada Act, which states the following. The board has the exclusive authority to determine whether any previous, current, or proposed use by a member of the House of Commons of any funds, goods, services, or premises made available to that member for the carrying out of parliamentary functions is or was proper, given the discharge of the parliamentary functions of the members of the House of Commons, including whether any such use is or was proper, having regard to the intent and purpose of the bylaws made under subsection 52.5 in bracket 1. Parliament has decided to give this responsibility to the board and has entrenched it in legislation. Given its responsibilities contained in the Parliament of Canada Act, if the board is presented with evidence of misuse of the House of Commons resources by the professional public servants of the House of Commons, officials from the House of Commons, are they not therefore obligated to take action to remedy the situation?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the board has the exclusive authority and the ultimate decision to be made. But again, based on information that is provided by the House administration, it's the board itself that ultimately makes the decision whether the recommendations are, whatever they say, ultimately the board, considering all the matters and facts, decide if the use was proper. Right. So the board makes the decisions.
Right. If a member of Parliament is directed by the board to repay House of Commons resources that were used inappropriately and they did not comply, what remedies does the House of Commons have to ensure compliance?
Certainly. Section 12 of the bylaws, paragraph 2, tells us that members are personally responsible for paying expenditures. Then we go to section 19, and you have kind of progressive process. The first one being in paragraph 19A, the board, if a member fails to comply with the bylaw, the board or the clerk of the House of Commons, acting under the authority of the board, may give written notice to the member responsible, requiring the member to rectify the situation to the satisfaction of the board or the clerk. First step. B, if the situation is not rectified to the satisfaction of the board or the clerk, the board may order that any amount of money necessary to rectify the situation be withheld from any budget, allowance, or other payment that may be made available to the member under the bylaw or the governance and administration bylaw. And C, next step, the board may order that any budget, allowance, or other payment that may be made available to the member under this bylaw or the governance and administration bylaw be frozen for such time and on such other conditions as the board consider necessary. I, if the non-compliance continues, or II, if the board considers it necessary to protect House of Commons funds. So that's the answer. I don't know if Mr. Waters wants to explain in practice how that would be done, but there is a process in the bylaws to deal with this.
If I may, just one last question first is, in November 27, 2012, a statement regarding allegations that former Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe made improper use of House of Commons resources, the Board of Internal Economy stated, it was never the intention of the board to allow House of Commons resources to be used to support political party activities or party staff. The board is confident that the revised members' bylaw, which was completed before these allegations came to light, will prevent similar events from occurring in the future. The NDP was on the board at this time and would have been participated in these discussions and would therefore have been well aware of these rules. Can you provide a summary of the changes that came into force in April 1, 2012?
All I can say, Mr. Chair, is that starting April 1st, 2012, the bylaws were modernized, revised, and the definition of parliamentary function was also reviewed, but was more a modernization of the bylaws than a revamping, if you wish. So the rules were just modernized. That's pretty much all I can say on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemmer. Go to Mr. Lukiski, 4-minute round, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to follow up a little bit on the conversation Mr. Dini had with Mr. Lamoureux on the potential non-compliance from NDP members. And I address my question to Mr. Waters. How would the House go about getting reimbursement for the $36,309 from the 23 NDP members if they chose not to voluntarily repay it? And that apparently is the position of the NDPs, to not repay any monies. So in practical terms, how would the House go about recovering that money?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the law clerk has explained, the process would be laid out in progressive steps in bylaw number 19, which would be that the clerk of the House, under the authority of the board, would first of all give notice to a member that an amount is outstanding. And if the situation is not rectified, as Mr. Denis suggested, then the clerk, through the board, may order that the amount of money necessary to rectify the situation be withheld from any budget. So the board would decide that a budget is to be reduced or payments are not to be made from a particular budget. And failing that, the budget that is afforded to a member under Section C may be frozen or not made available to a member until such time as the situation is rectified. So there's a series of progressive steps, as the law clerk had identified.
Have you any timetable in mind, Mr. Waters, as to initiating these steps?
if we look at Section 20 of the bylaws as well, it is the only place where we have a specific timeline in place, and it says that if a member is 90 days or more in arrears in an amount owed to the House of Commons, the Chief Financial Officer, which would be me in this particular case, may deduct the amount in arrears from any amount to be paid to the member other than a payment made under the Parliament of Canada Act for Sections 5562, which are basically the sessional allowance provisions of the Act. So from any other amounts owing to a member, within 90 days, an amount could be reduced in order to satisfy the arrears.
Would that be 90 sitting days or calendar days?
It says 90 days, so I guess absence specification would be calendar days.
So the statement of the board of June 12th stating that 23 new Democratic Party members will be directed to personally reimburse a total of $36,309. That is the start dates, and is 90 days from then. Do they have to repay the money? Am I correct in that assumption?
Mr. Chair, that it would depend on the date that the request was made of a member for reimbursement. So if a date was specified that we would, the board would like repayment by such and such a date, that is the date from which the 90 days would start to count down from.
Okay. How much time left, Chair? I'll start my question. I'll go back to it in my next round. I want to go back to the question of UNDP utilizing an outside printer for these mailings. And it may be a question neither one of you gentlemen can answer. It may be something that was best directed towards printing services. But how common is it for members of Parliament from whatever party to use outside printers for common mail-outs like 10%ers, householders? It would seem to me that, generally speaking, if an MP wants to do a mail-out and get reimbursed for that mail-out, they would use in-house printing services. Yet the NDP determined, for whatever reasons, we'll examine that in detail a little later, to use an outside printer. Do you know if that's a common practice or is that unusual?
You're going to have to get back to us on the answer.
All right.
Go to the next questioner. I'm going to pick Mr. Scott. Is that correct?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Julie.
Yeah, I'll be. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your. Well, no, it's interesting. There are a lot of good questions coming forward. I think it may have already been responded to. There have been other parties. In fact, other parties have been the subject of complaints that were made to the House Administration about using outside printers, and that was part of the letters directed to the House Administration about a year ago, about 15 months ago. So I believe, you may want to clarify, but I believe you already answered that other parties used the outside printer. I also wanted to add that the issue around the Board of Internal Economy and the secrecy provisions. Of course, you know we've been pressing to have the Board of Internal Economy opened up. Do you see any provisions that prohibit the kind of actually publicly discussing these issues so that the public can actually see that one party is being investigated and the majority on the BOIE is refusing to let the other parties be investigated for doing things that in my book are much more partisan. Do you see any reason why the BOIE could not meet in public around the complaints that the NDP has made about the partisan mailings coming from the Conservatives and the Liberal Party?
I can, Mr. Chairman, I can take the latter part of that question and say simply that it's not for us to comment on how the board should conduct its business or decide to conduct its business. For the earlier part of your question, I think Mr. Waters is in a position to provide an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the question of outside printers, I think you were speaking to, the member was speaking to. there's a prohibition on asking the House to reimburse for any printing done by an outside printer over 4,500 copies. As members know, that's clearly laid out in the Manual of Allowance and Services. So if members are having things printed for which they're not seeking reimbursement from the House in any amount over 4,500 copies, the House would not be aware of that necessarily. So.
Okay. Thank you. And that was certainly our case. The final question I just wanted to ask before I turn things over to Mr. Scott. We had hearings, as you recall, last fall, talking about replacing the BOIE because it's secretive, and at the time, there was some discussion that there was still a consensus-based model around that, and the clerk, Audrey O'Brien, and former speakers like Peter Milliken spoke very eloquently to the importance of maintaining a consensus model where all parties work together to resolve differences or issues that came up. That model, though I may disagree with it, certainly worked better than what we're seeing now, which is not consensus-based at all. You may not be able to comment on this, but do you see a problem when consensus-based decision-making within the BOE is replaced by partisan decision-making?
Mr. Chairman, very briefly, I would say that we believe the consensus model has worked very well historically and has the potential to continue working very well. Without commenting on any things that are taking place at the board, it is a desirable model, and we believe that it can work very well.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Lukowski.
Thank you very much. Comment before my question. I mean, this response to Mr. Julian's allegations again that everyone is doing the same thing. Well, clearly not. If the BOIE wanted to investigate any other specific allegation, they could do so. They don't do it on a normal basis because, frankly, no other party has sent out mailings for electoral purposes to try and influence a by-election or a federal election and use franked envelopes to do it. However, my question specifically to Mr. Waters, to go back on what you said, that there is a prohibition on anyone who, or any party or any MP who's sending over 4,500 copies in terms of trying to get reimbursed. Is that correct?
In terms of reimbursement, yes, Mr. Lukowski.
So if that's the case, then my understanding the mailings in question here were close to 2 million. Is that correct? Certainly well over 4,500.
I guess they do the math with the Canada Post. Yes, I would agree, Mr. Lukowski.
Okay, so in that case, there is no reimbursement given. I'm just curious, and again, we'll discuss this perhaps a little later, but I'm curious why someone, if they were producing a mailer which they felt was in proper order, why they would not want to use House Printing Services to get reimbursed. It would appear, though, if they thought that it was a political mail-out that they couldn't get reimbursed by, or if they couldn't get approval by the House, they might want to use an outside printer, pay for it themselves, so they could avoid that embarrassment. However, then, of course, you couldn't use franked envelopes, and that's exactly what I believe happened here. Let me go back again to the MPs who are using outside printing for 10%ers and householders. Would we be able to get that information from Printing Services as to how common that is? In other words, if someone wanted to use an outside printer for less than 4,500 copies and get reimbursed, surely there's a record in Printing Services. Yes?
Mr. Chair, all householders and 10%ers are prepared by the House.
Okay.
These are only, I think what you're talking about, what the member's talking about is other types of things that might be printed, but householders and 10%ers are produced strictly by the House, and so therefore the rules, the bylaws are applied. They're reviewed by printing and mailing services prior to publishing, and if there's an area that's gray, then there's a conversation with the member about possibly altering their 10%er or their householder to make it compliant.
If they wanted to mail out something like we saw in the NDP, it's not considered necessarily a 10%er, but they were going to put it into franked envelopes, they could certainly have in-house printing services produce that and be reimbursed if the content was acceptable. Yes?
That's correct. Printing and mailing services would prepare material at the request of members, subject to the entitlements, the paper allowances that members have to respect, but they would also ensure compliance with the bylaws.
Research and analysis on the investigation determined that the NDP content of these mailers was not acceptable and therefore improper and in violation of the rules. One would suspect that if they presented those to the in-house printers, they would be rejected, perhaps, which is a good motivation not to do it in-house. Again, that's an opinion. I wouldn't ask you to comment on that because it's not within your purview.
Thank you.
But my question goes back to, will the print services be able to provide information to this committee as to how many, whether you call them mailers or communication pieces, have been used by MPs and approved by the House? Would they have that information?
I believe we can get that information for the committee, certainly. If we're involved, we'll have the information.
Thank you. Through the clerk. You're still going. You got 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes. Thank you very much. Let me ask you something about, again, an inference, I suppose, by the NDP. There's been certainly some criticism by the NDP saying that this was a political decision. The BOI did this for political purposes. But that infers that the BOIE makes all of these decisions in a vacuum. Is that true, or are they based on research and analysis provided by nonpartisan professional House administration officials? The decision, in other words, might have been made by the BOIE, but they were in receipt of information provided by your officials, and they used that information and analysis to make their decision. Is that a correct assessment or a correct statement?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, it's correct. The material that goes to the board is always based on a team effort, if I can say, from the House administration, where specific topics that need to be researched are prepared by financial services, legal services, other services of the House, and information is provided to the board so that they have the full picture and are able to make their decisions.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll go back to one of my earlier comments when I asked Mr. Bosk whether or not we'd be able to see a copy of that report with their analysis and research. He said that would be a decision of the BOIE. I am recommending heartily to this committee that as a committee we make a request to see that report, to see exactly what that research and analysis showed, so we know on what basis the BOIE made their decision. Because the NDP continually is trying to say this was a political decision only. I would like to see the information provided to it before we can properly get an indication of why that decision was made and when it was made. Let me ask you one other question. This we're talking about the recovery by the House administration, by the board, of $36,309, but there's another $1.17 million outstanding, which you have identified would be basically owed to Canada Post. I would think the next logical step for this committee is to ask someone from Transport Canada or Canada Post to come in and ask them what steps they may be taking to recover that money. Would you have any comment? Would you think that, since it's out of your purview, I doubt whether or not you've had any conversations with Transport Canada, because I don't know why you would, but would you think that they would be able to provide some information or shine some light on the fact that they may be in a position to try and recover $1.17 million from the NDP?
That's a question for those officials, Mr. Lukiski.
Well, I certainly think then, Chair, that's we should look at that for our next meeting, to get Transport Canada officials in here and ask them a series of questions there. Have you had any communication with Elections Canada or the Commissioner of Canada Elections yet respecting the decision of the board? Since my time is limited, while you're trying to get that information, let me ask yet another question. Again, it goes back to the inference from the NDP that somehow if these meetings were held in public, things might be different. Let me just ask you, based on your analysis, even if the meetings of the BOIE were held in public, would that in any way have changed the recommendations that you made to the board, based on your analysis and investigation?
Our duty to the board does not change in that respect. And to answer the previous question, the public, the statement by the board indicates that the information being sent to Transport Canada would also be shared with the Chief Electoral Officer.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lukiski. Mr. Scott, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to point out that one of the reasons that Conservative, for example, mailings have not been subjected to the same kinds of requests by the BOIE to provide memos and opinions and everything else is precisely because the BOIE has not asked for that, because they are organized in a partisan majority government dominated fashion. I want to go to the Canada Post point. We had a quite amazing situation in the House recently. Last week, the Minister of Transport, despite constantly talking about being at arm's length from Canada Post and therefore ask Canada Post, don't ask me, when we ask anything else to do with Canada Post, in response to a planted question from a Conservative MP, she said, quote, "I also expect that those members will refuse to pay back Canada Post, and that is why I spoke to the CEO of Canada Post to ensure that he understood what was happening."
Oh, well.
He does. He takes it very seriously. Canada Post will be developing a plan to deal with the situation, unquote. So I'm particularly grateful to the Minister for making so clear in such a ham-fisted way that this is nothing but a political exercise. But the question here is, did the BOIE ask the Minister of Transport to insert herself in this way by contacting the CEO of Canada Post?
First of all, Mr. Scott, we again can't comment on discussions at the board. That being said, I think it's important to specify that the Speaker chairs the board. There is no majority on the board. And the Speaker, of course, is a non-partisan actor in this as chair of the board. Mr. Waters is pointing out to me that the board has an obligation to deal with the matters brought before it, and that is what it does.
Thank you. I'd say the Minister also thought she was providing a defense when she then said outside the House, quote, "No directives have been given in this case. It was just a phone call to ensure that they understood the issue and that they'd be looking into it. That's it," unquote. Now, she's a lawyer, but she didn't appear to grasp that this makes it even worse, as she made these calls to influence, and I dare say pressure, the Canada Post CEO with not even the pretense of legal authority. She says no directives have been given. I imagine you may not be able to answer this question, but is this an appropriate involvement of a minister in a BOIE matter?
We can't comment on that, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Now, should there be any doubt that the minister is pressuring Canada Post and intending to use it in the most instrumental fashion as a tool of the government, consider the press release she also sent, quote, "I will be discussing with the head of Canada Post in the coming days for a report on their plan to recover these funds. Despite the fact that Canada Post is reimbursed, it has to be Transport Canada that deals with this. Rest assured, every single penny the NDP will be paid back." End of quote. Now, putting all of these statements together, how would courts applying administrative law look on the fairness of any Canada Post decision to seek payment from MPs when that decision comes from the fact, or at very least the appearance, of political interference?
Here, here.
Again, Mr. Scott, this is a process entirely outside the House. We can't possibly comment.
Mr. Lukiski, you're back. You got 2 spots if you want them.
Yeah, for 2 minutes each?
4 minutes each.
4 minutes each, thank you. First question, again, this may be, I'm sorry, this may be something that's outside of your purview, but we talked about, and you've talked about the consensus model that the BOIE follows. I guess what my question would be is, even though this is a consensus model, if one party, and in this case obviously is the NDP, who has been found by independent research to be in violation of the rules of the BOIE in terms of these mailouts, in a consensus model, should or does one party have veto rights, like a UN Council? I mean, what the NDP is trying to suggest here is that this was an unfair process, but the consensus model has worked well. But clearly, if one party is in contravention of the rules, they can easily say, well, we were outvoted and it's not fair. I mean, the system is set up to be as fair as possible. Clearly, if one party is guilty and knows they're guilty, they're going to try and do whatever they can to stop any repercussions from occurring. So how would you square that circle? How do you sort of deal with a consensus model if, in fact, you've got one party that doesn't want to play ball, that doesn't want to agree to a consensus, even if the evidence proves, or at least demonstrates, that they have been in violation of the rules?
You know, Mr. Lukiski, the board works in mysterious ways. And again, we can't comment on how the board arrives at decisions, but it does arrive at decisions. And historically, that's been done by consensus.
Okay. Let's go back then to where we started. I just want to make sure we're all crystal clear on this one. The mailings in question, the nearly 2 million pieces of mail that the NDP sent out using an outside printer that they put into franked envelopes, the content of those mailings were never seen by House administration. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
So therefore, unless there was a complaint to the BOIE, which there was, the House administration may never had known that these mailings were in contravention of the rules. Correct?
That's correct. Correct.
So if a party wanted to deliberately mislead House administration, they could do so by following the model we've seen by the NDP. Use an outside printer, pay for it yourself, of course, because there's over 4,500 copies, which if you were a party engaged in an election campaign, you would do anyway, because that's obviously a party function, and then put it into franked envelopes. So you end up paying for campaign literature, in effect, and that's exactly what this was, but stick the taxpayer with the postage. Now, I'm wondering if there's anything that could be done if events like this have occurred or will occur again in the future, that you would suggest or recommend to the BOIE for their consideration in terms of preventative measures. I mean, it's quite obvious to me, and obviously I have a viewpoint that you can't comment on because you are nonpartisan, you are a professional, but we know now a number of things. Outside printers were used, NDP paid for it, House administration never saw it, but if they would have seen the content of those mailings, they would have rejected them. And franked letters were used to mail out improper election campaign pieces. That's what we know as a basis, as a result of this meeting. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for this committee, even though it's the board's decision ultimately, but this committee can make recommendations. If you have any suggestions for this committee, how to prevent this type of thing from happening again?
Mr. Chair, one way of looking at it could be a recommendation from this committee as to how the use of the franc could be clarified in the future, so that, for example, it would relate to different things like relating to the parliamentary functions of members, expand it, restrict it, but that would be one aspect of.
Would one recommendation, if we recommended as an example, all mailings that are to be put in franked envelopes must be approved by the House? Would that be a recommendation that you think would be worthwhile considering?
Issue that would require. I would say at the outset that this is a much more complex issue than it might appear to be, and it would require considerable analysis before we could answer that question.
But let me just point out again, what we do know is had those mailings, the mailings that were found to be in violation of the rules, had those mailings been sent to the House administration, they wouldn't have been approved. That would have been the end of it. The NDP then could still send them out if they wanted, but they'd have to pay for them and the postage. But at least the House would have been able to step in and say, sorry, you can't use franked envelopes. So it seems to me a very simple fix by requiring all mailings by political parties who wish to use franked envelopes to be viewed and approved or rejected by House administration. Would that not be a fairly simple approach to fix this complex problem? Simple solution?
I'm sure the board will welcome any recommendations the committee wishes to make.
Excellent.
On any issue.
Thank you very much. Time, Chair?
Just under 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. If the NDP wanted the discussion on these matters to have been held in public, as they say that they're all in favor of, what would they have had to do to make that happen? Or was it even possible to have these discussions in public? Are you in a position to discuss whether they undertook any actions to try and make this public? Because the point I'm getting at is that we don't know. I wish I did know. I understand this investigation and this discussion in the BYU went on for several months. I would certainly suggest that this committee ask and request of the Board of Internal Economy a copy of the report so we can take a look at exactly what evidence you found when making the recommendations that you did to the board to ask the NDP to repay. So I'm wondering if the NDP was truly sincere in wanting to have all of the deliberations of this particular issue of which they've been found guilty, if they've been sincere wanting to be made public, did they approach the board? Can you comment on that? Did they try and make any effort to have these deliberations in public?
Mr. Lukowski, we can't comment on that.
Perhaps we can ask the board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lukowski. We'll go to Mr. Julian, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, Mr. Lukowski knows because he denied our unanimous consent motion that we brought forward in the House that day, just before the BOIE. So Mr. Lukowski actually knows that the NDP undertook and has been undertaking now for almost a year to break open the partisan, secretive, and ugly BOIE, the pro-conservative BOIE.
Recommendation to see the report.
It's very interesting. Now, so I did reference earlier this very personal, vicious, partisan attack on the leader of the official opposition being sent out as we speak, because I'm getting complaints and even tweets tonight from folks saying, I got this from my CPC member. It is linked up.
Is that a franked mail, or did it come as a householder or 10%?
It is known as, vicious and partisan. And it references the CPC caucus website, which basically asks people who's on the right track. It references the CPC caucus website, but the CPC caucus website is owned by none other than the Conservative Party of Canada. Very interesting. So what we've got is sort of a front website that is part of the secretive SIMS program that has been involved in a lot of the controversial mailings. But This is okay, as I understand it, because, and I'm not going to put words in your mouths, we appreciate you being here, and this has actually been extremely valuable, I think, to the NDP to demonstrate exactly how partisan the BOIE is right now. But we've made complaints prior, made previous complaints that have not been investigated. Making a complaint about this tie-in to the Conservative Party-owned website that is part of this particular mail-out that's going out as we speak. Without putting words in your mouth, no matter how many times we complain, if the Conservative majority on the BOIE with the Liberal ally decides that this is not to be investigated, the House administration cannot investigate it. Am I correct in that? So unless the BOIE says to the House administration, investigate something or give us references on something, the House administration can do nothing on its own. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Chair, I can tell you, having been at a number of board meetings since my appointment here at the House in 2011, every request for investigation that has gone to the board has been dealt with or is in the process of being dealt with. The board does those on a regular basis. There's no partisan selection on the investigation side. Every complaint that comes to the board deals with, has dealt with, or is in the process of dealing with as we speak.
So all of these have been okayed.
So that would mean then that in this case with the CPC caucus, the Conservative Party-owned website that is the front for the taxpayers' paid mailings that are quite vicious and personal and partisan, that the BOIE would normally take a look on that if there was an agreement by the majority at the BOIE to look into this mailing.
No, Mr. Chair, I can clarify that what would happen is if a complaint is received at the board, it is investigated. The House administration, after consulting with the various service areas, would prepare an analysis and a report to the board, and then the board would deal with that report. Again, for clarity, Mr. Chair, everything that comes to the board is investigated, and it comes to a conclusion or is currently in the process of being investigated.
And I would just add that there is no Conservative majority on the board. There are 3 Conservative members on it, 2 New Democrats, 1 Liberal, and the Speaker is the Chair.
7 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to correct the record because once again my colleague, Mr. Julian, is either ignorantly or deliberately misleading the House because the CPC caucus does not own the website. CRG, as a research arm, does. The caucus does not own that. Yeah, figure it out. Figure it out. CRG owns it. Anyway, let's go back, if we can again, to now. Let me ask a question, Chair. Are we going for another full 7 minutes around?
Yeah, sorry, I should have announced at the beginning that we would just extend the meeting by the amount that we missed for the votes, and so consider us here till 20 after. Is that correct? When we started, so we'll just carry on.
Are we having just again for clarification and for the benefit of our guests? Were they here for an hour or the full 2 hours?
No, we were saving some time at the end for committee business. There's a couple of motions that are before the committee that may very well be brought forward tonight, so I was saving some time for that.
Thank you. Could you just maybe, again, for the benefit of the committee, let us know how much time we've got left in questioning before?
Yeah, so we'll finish the meeting at about 20 after 7, so let's say at about 10 after 7 we'd go to committee business.
Okay, if that's enough time.
Pardon? It's after 8. I'm sorry, I'm on Central Time right now.
All right. Okay. I've got to go back again to this business of outside mailings. Had you confirmed to this committee that it would be appropriate and beneficial to the committee to have someone from House of Commons Print Services come in to answer questions that I've raised before, or are you gentlemen in a position to answer any of the questions I may have? I know you've answered a couple, which I appreciate very much. You've stated you would be able to find the information as to how many outside mailings, right, had been had been vetted through House administration, but would we be able to get some more information that you may not possess yourself from someone who's in print services?
We can try and get whatever information the committee is looking for in terms of printing statistics, and we can do that any number of ways, administratively, any way the committee wishes.
Okay. Getting back to the outside printing then, have you, in your analysis and your investigation, been able to determine with any certainty how many mailings were actually sent out in franked envelopes? In other words, you said you didn't see the mailings, you didn't know what was in the franked envelope. For an example, how many franked envelopes did the NDP request if they put in a request for them? The figure that we've heard is roughly 1.8 to 2 million mailings that went out across Canada. Can you give this committee some assurance with any certainty that that's all that was sent out, or could there potentially have been more that we're not aware of?
Mr. Chair, I can confirm that we acted based on the information that we had. So in answer to the question from the member, if we don't have the information or we've not been made aware of any other mailings, then we haven't been able to act or make a recommendation to the board based on mailings that we're not aware of. So we provided information to the board based on what we knew and not what might possibly be out there, if you wish.
In the conduct of your investigation then, can you confirm whether you requested from the NDP copies of all of their mailings?
For fear of making a mistake with regard to our oath, could you repeat the question so we grasp it properly?
Okay, I'm just wondering if you can assure this committee with any certainty that the 1.8 to 2 million mailings which you refer to were the only mailings that were sent out, or could there have been more that you're not aware of? In other words, I asked originally if you asked the NDP, requested from the NDP copies of all their mailings. We didn't get an assurance on that, so how do we know whether or not the 1.8 to 2 million mailings were all that were put in franked envelopes? Have you any assurances for this committee that that's all that they mailed out, or are there others out there that we may not know of and may find at some future date?
Mr. Chair, what I can answer to that is that we dealt as similarly to the answers that I provided in the past about the board investigating complaints it receives. With respect to this particular issue, we dealt with the information that we had, and we got all the information that we needed with respect to this particular issue. We don't know about anything else because that wasn't what was complained about. So with respect to this particular issue, we got the information that we needed on that. I hope that answers.
Thank you for that, Mr. Waters. I was referring to this particular issue. So you are convinced that on this particular set of mailings, the investigation which you completed, all of the mailings had been presented to you by the NDP. There are no other mailings. Since we didn't know, you didn't know, we didn't know what was going out because they didn't ask for approval from the House. They got an outside printer to print some stuff that clearly were in violation of the rules, put them in franked envelopes, sent them out. We were aware of some because members received them. So we made a complaint based on what we knew, but perhaps there's other mailings that went out that weren't picked up. And so therefore, we were not able to lodge a complaint. I'm wondering, is there another way to try and determine this? For an example, just prior to...
Sorry, but I got to stop you. You might get another shot yet. Mr. Scott, 7 minutes. He is there. I knew he was there.
Just before he goes in.
He likes to make a grand.
Yeah, the wonderful thing about the Twitterverse, Mr. Chair, is that people send in information. So,
is this a point of order? Or?
No. Just to start off before I turn things over to Mr. Craig.
All right.
Who's this information for cpccaucus.ca, registered, and the registrant name is the Conservative Party of Canada. So, Mr. Chair, just wanted to confirm Mr. Lequiski tried to kind of dodge the puck, but right here, fortunately, one of the alert people out there in a Conservative Party riding actually said, hold on here, let's get the who's this registration. Very clearly, it's the Conservative Party of Canada. I'll pass things over to my colleague, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. I think Mr. Lequiski might, I think the House probably knows, the administration probably knows that PAMS can account for everything that was sent out. And everything that was reported is everything that was sent out. So aspersions aside, if I could continue. Could I ask Monsieur Denis, Mr. Waters will recognize where this question is coming from. If a rule has been interpreted and applied in a certain way for some time, and if everyone has come to rely on that interpretation or application, let's just say some kind of a living law or a law in practice is developed about that, is there any kind of a concern just from a retroactivity or a natural justice perspective if there's a sudden retroactive application of the rules without giving notice of the change so as to give people the opportunity to adjust to the new administrative reality?
This is the kind of decision that the board would be called on to make.
Okay.
Mr. Scott?
Great, thank you. Mr. Denis or Mr. Bosk, if one were to assume that there's a process to be carried out in the name of law or internal law procedure of, say, a parliament, but the procedure is A, secret, B, just assume, used for political purposes, including to go after one's political enemies, and C, it makes decisions that are arbitrary. Two examples of arbitrary. That applies to some but not to others, so there's no equality before the law, and that it applies rules or new interpretations of rules retroactively. Would that be a problem if the BOIE acted in that fashion?
It's a hypothetical question, and I don't think we're at liberty really to go there at this time.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to end. Do I have 2 minutes, Mr. Chair?
4 more minutes.
Oh, I'm in the 7-minute round. Sorry. Okay. So that's good. I wanted to turn to the notion of a partisan. And I've had this conversation with one of Mr. Denis' colleagues. That one of the biggest concerns I have as a parliamentarian is I belong to a political party that is a party in Parliament, and that the very word partisan is of a party. And we know that the bylaws make very, very clear that parliamentary functions relating to the position of a member, wherever performed and whether or not performed in a partisan manner, it's just part of the idea of parliamentary is that we're at least permitted to be partisan. There are independents, but we're permitted to be partisan. And parties are built into the very structure of Parliament. The Parliament of Canada Act obviously makes that clear. We have a governing party and an official opposition that has to be a party to be an official opposition. And again, we have the members' bylaw that recognizes that reality. And so my concern is that in all of what's been going on, this word partisan is being thrown around in a way that could be, frankly, undermining the average Canadian's understanding of the legitimacy of being a partisan in a parliamentary sense, partisan while engaging in parliamentary functions. So, for example, when I say Stephen Harper in my communications, in my householders, for example, that are allowed to go, I'm talking about the Prime Minister of Canada, who happens also to be the leader of the party in Parliament, the Conservative Party. And I'm not referring to Stephen Harper as the leader of the Conservative Party, the extra parliamentary party. When I refer to Tom Mulcair as the leader of the official opposition, I'm referring to him as the leader of a party in Parliament. When in one of my mailings I say members of the NDP team, I mean members of the NDP team of MPs in Toronto, for example. So there's lots of sous-entendu. There's lots of references that, as a parliamentarian and frankly as a constitutional lawyer, I make these references understanding I'm talking about the partisan side of Parliament. And that includes the idea that I have absolutely no shame in being part of a caucus, engaging in solidarity, wanting to sell to Canadians that we have an amazing leader that's doing X, Y, and Z in Parliament. And so my concern is that we have a definition, Section 1 of parliamentary functions, that makes very clear, however partisan, and then we have a list of exceptions, without, to be more certain than the exceptions. And my concern is that those exceptions are being interpreted too expansively and to actually protect the idea of parties in Parliament being central to our system. And I'm just wondering, I'm not asking you to say that the interpretations that have been made by the law clerk's office have been too expansive of the exceptions, but I'm asking whether or not you, in any sense, understand where I'm coming from. That this distinction between parties in Parliament and the extra-parliamentary party has to be made, and the space for partisanship when it comes to being parliamentary partisan has to be preserved by the BOE, by PROC, and by, frankly, the House administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly understand where you're coming from, Mr. Scott. And as you said, I point out that the definition of parliamentary functions totally accepts and considers the fact that, of course, members can and actually have to be partisan. But the test, as I said earlier, is always that you look at whatever situation you're faced with in the context of whether or not the member was performing his parliamentary functions. And that's what we use in everything that we review in terms of surveys or questions or activities of members. And it has so far served us well. If in our interpretation it's found that either it's too strict or too lenient or too wide, I should say, then a member can easily go to the board and make their point. And often that's the case. But the test that's applied relates to whether or not the situation touches on the parliamentary functions of the member. And partisan activities are totally acceptable as long as what the activity we're looking at relates to those functions. So that's why when you touch on political activities, on partisanship that's outside of the realm of parliamentary functions, of what a member does, then it's found to be not acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We'll go to Mr. Lamoureux for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question right off the get-go, is that if I were to put out a flyer, for example, that said that it was in fact authorized by the official agent of my party, would that suggest it was of electoral nature?
Depends on the context.
I guess just using that statement, and this is a statement that is used when individuals are in the midst of campaigns, we're obligated to have authorized by official agent.
Mr. Lamoureux, we're sort of uncomfortable answering hypothetical type questions of that sort because we don't have a context for the overall picture. And normally, if there were concern about a particular piece of communication, we would have it, look at it, and assess it as a whole and make a recommendation to the board if there was an issue that had been brought to the board's attention.
Yeah. I think one of the things to recognize is that as a committee, we're trying to come up with some ideas and suggestions in terms of how we might be able to fix the system. And part of that maybe deals with information that the professional civil servants actually brought forward to the Board of Internal Economy so that they could get a better understanding and appreciation of what had taken place. Can you give any indication in terms of what would it take for this particular committee to be able to gain access and use the information that the Board of Internal Economy would have used in making that final decision? Would the unanimous support of the Board of Internal Economy suffice for them to be able to release the study that you had conducted?
As we've said before, Mr. Lamoureux, this is the kind of request that would go to the board, and the board would have to consider it and decide whether it approved it or not.
So the board would have the authority then to say that we would like the PROC committee to have and use for their study. That wouldn't be a problem then, as long as you had...
It would be up to the board.
Okay, the board has a spokesperson that will speak on behalf, or two spokespeople that speak on behalf of the board. If this committee were wanting to call them to come before a committee to answer questions, would that require the Board of Internal Economy's approval for that?
Well, they obviously would have to respect their oath, but at the same time, they're members of Parliament, so they could be invited, but they can't be compelled.
Right. Is there things that the Board of Internal Economy could do that would enable those spokespeople to be very frank and open as to the discussions that had taken place, or are there restrictions that would prevent them from doing that?
Again, the board discussions are confidential, Mr. Lamoureux, and it would be up to them essentially to decide or agree on what they would be prepared to share. But typically, board spokespersons are authorized to say certain things by the board itself.
I made reference earlier to the improper use of House of Commons resources. I cited back in November 27th where a statement regarding the allegations of the former bloc leader was made in regards to improper use of House of Commons resources. A complete revision actually was done of the bylaws, which began in August of 2010. It was approved on November 21, and then on December 5, 2011, it came into force actually on April 1, 2012. As part of the review, the definition of parliamentary functions was clarified, and political party and electoral activities are now clearly excluded. Can you, again, I'll look to you, I guess, Mr. Denny or others, that might be able to provide a summary of what those actual changes were that came into force on April 1. I know earlier you made reference that maybe Mr. Waters might want to add something to it.
Mr. Chair, you're testing my memory because I have this beautiful table in my office comparing the old definition of parliamentary function and the new one, which I would be more than happy to share with the committee. We have a table of the old provisions, the new ones. The exercise was mostly a modernization, but there were some provisions that were clarified. And, for example, subsection 4.3, when you clarify or specify more what is not a parliamentary function is kind of a clarification of the old rules. So I'm more than prepared to provide that to the committee so that it has that information, if that would help.
Yeah, I think that would be very beneficial. So if my memory serves me correct, you cannot ask for membership. You cannot ask for donations. These are some of the very basic requirements that would be disallowed.
Mr. Chair, I actually, thanks to Mr. Waters, who's very organized, have a deck that explains what was new in the revised bylaws that came into force April 1st, 2012. I can quickly quote here
Main changes found in the revised bylaws. 1, clarification of the definition of parliamentary functions. 2, change in the definition of immediate family, impact on existing contracts or employment relationship with brothers and sisters. 3, clarification of the use of the mandatory form for contracts for professional services. 4, clarification of the rules that apply to the different type of contracts. 5, employees of House officers or members cannot be the landlord of any member, either for their constituency office leases or for their secondary residences. 6, travel section totally reorganized and policy details now only appear in the mass. 7, the employee is on travel status when he or she is more than 100 kilometers from his or her normal place of work, which formerly was the personal residence. 8, half per diem on the date of travel will apply since the current application is not in accordance with the board's policies. And 9, the person who is responsible for the NCRO is not necessarily a House officer. National Caucus Research Office. It goes on. 10, the clarification of the rules of House officers as distinct from members and National Caucus Research Office. 11, no transfer of funds between recognized party budgets, including the National Caucus Research budget, the House officers budget, and members' budgets. Clarification as it relates to the dissolution of Parliament, and the last one, clarification that family members of members may not use the resources provided to the members. So a series of issues that were clarified. Some have been changed since, in fact, through different decisions of the board. So to do a better job, I could probably provide something clearer to the committee so that you would have something to look at in terms of what was before and after April 1st, 2012.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lemery. We'll go to Mr. Butt, 4 minutes. Please and
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight. I remember fairly accurately when I first got elected in May of 2011, and I came to Ottawa and I had my orientation session with a number of your staff from different divisions. They were very tough. They read me the Riot Act on being personally responsible, personally liable, financially and otherwise, for any activities that took place in my role as a member of Parliament. I'm assuming that orientation is done for all members of Parliament in all parties, whether it's elected the first time in a general election or subsequently in a by-election. You do consistently sit down with every single new member of Parliament, do a full orientation and explain all of these rules on personal liability for their office budgets and any activities they take place. You do that for every MP, is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if, as an example, we are responsible for our franking privileges. We are liable and responsible for whatever it is we're mailing out to our constituents or in any other role that we have as an MP, whether we're a government MP or an opposition MP. I don't think it matters. We're all parliamentarians. We're all treated equally under the system. If I were, as an example, to say to a group that wanted to do a mass mailing, here's 5 boxes, here's 2,000 or 3,000 franked envelopes with my name on it, and I gave it to a third party, perhaps I gave it to my own political party, and said to them, you can use these envelopes and you can mail out whatever you want under those envelopes because I'm a member of the team and I want to be a good member of the team. So if I were to do that, hand over those envelopes to a third party, my political party, my research group, and say, you mail out whatever you want in my franked envelopes, am I not still responsible for whatever is sent in that franked envelope?
Mr. Butt, I'll answer in a general way, and then Richard can be more specific. In the bylaws, Part 1 of the general provisions, Section 4, has 1, 2, 3 parts, and the 4th part of that bylaw says members shall, and this is the bylaw that has reference to the use of House of Commons resources. The 4th paragraph of that bylaw says members shall ensure that the requirements set out in subsection 1 are met. So the member is responsible, personally responsible. And this includes activities by staff.
Okay. Did Mr. Denis want to answer the question as well?
Point of order. Go ahead.
Yeah, not to come off. Could you say which section again we're talking about?
It's in the Part 1 of the general provisions, Section 4.
Okay, Mr. Denny wants to answer
Yes.
as well. That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to complete, in the mass you find in the section regarding large volume printing, specifically said that since the House Administration is the sole provider of large volume printed material for members, any printed material produced in whole or in part directly in members' office or by external suppliers exceeding 4,500 copies will not be processed or assembled by the House Administration. So that's your restriction on the...
Okay, and my supplementary question to that is, if I were to do a mailing out of my office and on the flyer, regardless of what the content material is, if I were to send a flyer out to my constituents or elsewhere under my franking privileges, and there was a line at the bottom of the flyer that said, the flyer has been paid for and authorized by the CFO for my political party, I shouldn't be able to mail. That's a political election. That's something the party has certified, not Parliament, not in my role as an MP. So if I'm mailing stuff out in my franking privileges, any flyer, and it has any reference to it being paid or approved by the political party that I happen to represent, is that not a violation of the rules?
It certainly sounds like it might be, but again, as I said to Mr. Lemmer earlier, you know, dealing with these kinds of issues in a hypothetical sense is always a little delicate. We always like to see exactly what we're talking about and do a proper analysis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Butt.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to add to answer the question from Mr. Butt, again, in the mass section on the large volume mailing, fully assembled, including sealed printed materials prepared in whole or in part in member's office or by an external supplier may be mailed under the conditions outlined above. It is the member's responsibility to ensure that these materials comply with the bylaws and policies of the Board of Internal Economy.
Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Scott. I'm told it's him this time.
It is.
All right.
Thank you.
I was waiting for it to change just to get your chair going.
This may come across as a kind of a geeky lawyer-to-lawyer question, but for Monsieur Denis, if in a legal document we were to use the word deemed, that something is deemed to have happened, does that normally mean that normally that means that something that is X is actually deemed to be something that is other than X? So, for example, when we say in the House it's 6:50, and then we say we shall see the clock at 7 o'clock, we're deeming that. That's the way I understand deemed. So is that the usage that would normally be also a legal usage of the word deemed?
To the risk of being put on the spot here, I would interpret deem as being, meaning it's a presumption. And as we say in civil law, I'm trained in both common law and civil law, but in civil law, une présomption a deux formes.
Presumption has two forms.
Circumstances can be overturned. Okay. And that's the case here, I would say. Depending on, it's really a question of context, what you're looking at in this situation. It's hard to answer just like this in
but the way you answered it would be one common usage of deemed. Okay, thank you. I also, I mean, if it were the case, if it were the case that for whatever other reasons, everybody always has multiple reasons for doing things, but for whatever other reasons, a couple of parties decided that another party needed to be knocked down a peg and decided it was time to make some decisions on that basis. And they wanted to make those decisions within the BOIE. Is there anything about the BOIE process that could absolutely prevent that? So the use of the BOIE process for political purposes, is there anything about the process that prevents that? Apart from the Speaker obviously doing things to try to keep things outside of that realm.
Mr. Scott, the composition of the board can change over time. At one time, there were 5 recognized parties in the House. The board composition is determined by law. Richard can comment on those provisions, but we can't really comment on what might or might not be. What is.
What is?
Very good.
What is?
Very good. Very good.
What is definitely is. Thank you. I actually don't have any more questions unless my colleagues do.
Certainly do. Just following up on that. Is there anything that would prohibit the Auditor General from coming in and looking at parliamentary expenses, as the NDP has been advocating now for over a year, aside from the refusal of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party to allow the Auditor General in? In other words, if those parties would agree to bring the Auditor General in to monitor all expenses, not just the mailing program, but all expenses, do you see any difficulties with that happening if the 2 old parties would get over their incredible opposition to letting the Auditor General actually come in and look at our expenses?
A question to Mr. Julian's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first issue would be the question of whether or not the Auditor General has a jurisdiction to actually look at members' expenses and over the House of Commons. That would be a legal question to be considered. Next to that would be the question of getting the board's permission, because in the past, the only 2 times where the Auditor General came into looking at or doing an audit of a House's resources and expenses of members was on the invitation of the board. So that's the history.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lukiski for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you much, Chair. And gentlemen, let me say, because I know we're getting close to the end of our time, I want to thank you very, very much for your appearance here today. You provided excellent information, and you provided, I think, this committee with the type of information we need to continue this study, because it opens up a lot of doors for areas in which we may want to pursue in the future. One of those I want to talk about is liability. We know that the money owed to the House is $36,309. We also know that the board has recommended that the repayment, however, to Canada Post be in the amount of $1.17 million. We also know, at least if I'm reading your briefing correctly, or the briefing provided to this committee, that there's 23 members of Parliament of the NDP who are listed as the ones who participated in these inappropriate and illegal mailings. So my question to you would be on liability. Whether these MPs would be liable jointly, severally, would others, whether the House leaders or House officers' budgets in the NDP, be able to provide repayment? Exactly what would the liability be for these 23 members of Parliament? And the ones I would like to just confirm, again, if I have the information correct, and you may have that information, you may want to just consult with your records. We're talking about MPs Hughes, Boivin, Gravel, Allen, Sasaspian, I know I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, and I apologize for that, Cleary, Boularice, Groguet, Blanchette, Moulamont, Caron, Malcaire, Scott, Leslie, Chisholm, Monan, Moore, Freeman, Boutin-Sweet, Toon, Nichols, Dubé, and Freeman. Would those 23 individuals be personally liable for the close to $1.2 million if, in fact, Canada Post decide to pursue repayment? So you add the 1.17 with the 36,309. That's well over $50,000, well, slightly over $50,000 per member listed.
Mr. Chair, everything with respect to the bylaws points to the members being entrusted with a personal budget. Therefore, the liability with respect to House resources would be individual and personal. It wouldn't be collective. I can't speak for the Crown Corporation. I can't speak for the Department of Transport, so I'm not sure how they would assess liability, if any. The obligation of the House was to communicate that information and not necessarily to make any decision of liability per se. But with respect to the $36,000 for the House, it would be members as individuals. And any recourse in terms of what I talked about earlier about the non-compliance provisions, sections 19, and the progressive recourse that we would apply to members as individuals, according to the decisions made by the board for those members as individuals.
So then, just to be crystal clear on this one, if the NDP party said that they wanted to provide financial assistance to the members, would that be allowed? Would that be appropriate?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, in my opinion, I would say no, because there is no link really between the House and the NDP. And again, House resources are provided to each member individually. That's specifically said in the bylaws, so the recovery, as Mr. Waters explained, would be from members individually.
Thank you, Mr. Lukiski. I'm going to stop you there, and I think I'll stop at this point. Thank our guests. There's a couple of questions that were asked today of our members. One was some sort of report from yourselves about who members who have printed outside the House and what the billings for those were. We've been asked to report back to the board our findings on some of this stuff. There's a request from them to do so. But one of the questions that Mr. Lukiski asked was, can we get the report that you submitted to the board? Is that a request this committee has to make of the board in order for that to happen, Mr. Bosco?
Yes.
So this committee will have to do that. Monsieur Denis, you suggested you had a table of comparisons of the old board rules versus the new board rules. That may be very helpful for this committee in its further study.
With pleasure, Mr. Chair. No problem.
Okay. And Mr. Bosk, you also made a suggestion for us as we're making that report back to the board, but I've listed it about the recommended use of franks and the respect of it and how to, what might go forward further in that. So this board will keep that in mind as we're writing, or this committee will keep that in mind as we're writing back to the board. I thank you for your time tonight. I apologize for the delay getting started. You've been more than helpful. You did a great job staying within what you could share with us and what you could not. Thank you very much. We'll suspend just for a couple minutes while our witnesses leave. We are back. We have 10 minutes or so left in our time today, but of course the committee can be the master of its own on this one. We had a couple of pieces of committee business. You all had received a committee report, a draft committee report. If we're at the last meeting, the Cracker Jack analysts had prepared for you a report on the Bazan's privilege motion, and you all took it away with you at the last meeting. And if you wanted to discuss that, we'd have to go in camera in order to discuss that. We also had 2 or 3 outstanding motions from Mr. Christofferson. Okay. You want to move one today?
If I can move one and debate it, get a decision, Chair, yeah, I'd appreciate
Okay,
that.
go for it.
Thank you very much, Chair. The motion that I'm bringing forward was the notice of motion I served that reads as follows, that the committee request that the Auditor General of Canada conduct an audit into the mailing programs of all members of Parliament from March 31st, 2010 forward, including the mailing programs of House officers and ministers, to determine whether any bylaws were violated in the production or sending of addressed or unaddressed mail by members, and report back to the committee no later than Monday, December 15th, 2014. If I might, Chair, I don't have a long speech, which, given our history, you will greatly appreciate, I'm sure.
I'd like to move on whether it's in order or not. First, I'd like to rule on that your motion is not in order for this committee. It's, again,
but nobody's raised a complaint. I mean, we had the Speaker who said things were okay unless somebody raised a complaint, and he wasn't going to step in. But now you're applying rules differently. You're going to step in without a complaint?
I think at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, the chair should do his best to make sure that anything that's happening at the committee falls into the rules. And in this case, I'm going to suggest that your motion is out of order before we get into discussing it, as we should, so that we don't get halfway through the discussion and then the chair make that ruling. I'm simply going to rule that it's outside the scope of this committee, as I have with a couple of other motions. And the other side of it is, of course, the Auditor General has the freedom to do any audit the Auditor General would like to do.
Fair enough.
So I'll rule the motion out of order.
Wait, could I make a case at least to you?
Yes, I'm going to try and do something to help David.
Point of order.
Really am.
Now that I want to see.
No, I am.
I'll go to Mr. Lukiski first, because this sounds intriguing.
Well, no, we heard today from Mr. Waters that any request for an investigation by the Board of Internal Economy has been conducted. So if you want to see an audit, why don't you make the request to the Board of Internal Economy? You have representation on there. They can do a full investigation, right? There's never been refused, according to Mr. Waters. So you can get what you're looking for by simply, if this is out of order and you have no other recourse, make application to the board.
I haven't given up the fact that I hear what you're saying, but that's presuming that this is dead, and I think we got a little bit of a process left. I would hope that I could at least make a pitch, very brief, with respect.
Truly, I'm not supposed to let you do it, but David, because I love you, go ahead and give me your 1 minute
well,
pitch
listen,
on why this
I'll return the love, Chair, and I really will be brief. But I'm just, Mr. Lukiski just talked about if that doesn't work as an alternative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this is out of order. I fail to understand why a motion of recommendation that asks for auditing work is out of order. That's really all that's happening, and whether it goes to BOIE or whether it goes to the Auditor General direct is up to you, Chair. But the notion that it is it's okay for us to have this witch hunt that's going on meeting after meeting after meeting, but it's not okay to ask the Auditor General to do a formal review of everybody's mailing. Everybody equal, out in public, what we've been asking for so long. So, Chair, I find it remarkable that a motion that speaks to the very issue that we're talking about here broadens it out to make it fair and bring in one of the most trusted people in Canada, the Auditor General. I don't see how that could possibly be out of order when it's just a recommendation. And it's very germane, for that matter, to the subject matter in front of us right now, Chair.
Yeah. Fine. Thank you, David. I did let you make your point, but I will rule the motion out of order. On a point of order, different than that one, Mr. Julian?
No, on the same one, but I'm hoping for your generosity to give me 30 seconds, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the 30 seconds I gave Mr. Christopherson included your extra 30 seconds too, because he took
The Auditor General came to this committee and requested this. The Auditor General came to Procedure and House Affairs, you'll recall, last fall, and actually requested permission to be able to audit the Parliament of Canada. So it would be impossible, except if we live in a kangaroo court
Mr.
structure,
Julian,
to rule something
Mr.
out
Julian,
of order that the Auditor General requested here at this very committee.
Mr. Julian, again, you know, there is some rules here. When I start to talk, I'm going to shut you down.
Only rules that help
right?
the Conservatives, it seems, Mr. Chair.
I love your ability to say what a bad job I do at each and every committee meeting. And because of that, I'm not even going to give you an answer. We're just going to go with the ruling I've already made. Yes, Mr.
Just again to add some finality to this, I don't know what Peter's trying to get at here, but he should know, at least I would hope he would know since he raised it, that the recommendations made were contained in a report that we made to Parliament and it was concurred in.
Okay. Any other committee business?
One sentence.
Craig?
Why is it out of order? Based on what you just said. How come that was in order and this is out of order?
Okay, folks.
I don't understand.
I'm way gone. Go ahead.
Make a complaint
That
to the board.
report was okay, but this one isn't.
Make a complaint to the board. That's what you guys are investigating.
Come on,
People,
folks.
good thing this is in public and people can see what's going on.
Folks,
Yeah, we are really glad, David.
I guess we're adjourned.